This video is about weathering tankers and try to go from this to this. Today I thought I'd take a look at block tanker trains, and whether you're an early steam, a late steam, an early diesel, a late diesel or electric modeler, then tanker trains in blocks are something you might be interested in. Of course, there were various tankers throughout the ages, and with a little interest and dabbling around on the internet, you can find yourself some very good examples of tankers which you can replicate, you know, both on in their batches and by the weathering. There are lots of tankers on the market, and I've done a video before on what not to buy, and this is another typical example of what not to buy. This is a Duracell tanker. It's modelled on the 10 or 14 ton wagon from eras 3 and 5. But it's part of a train set kit, but it shows you exactly what it is. But as I said, the thing to do is learn from your mistakes and not repeat them, because the last thing we want to do is waste money buying stock that we don't really need. The 45 ton Tta Wagon is very popular, and this is an early Hornby version, as is this Shell wagon. They're not the finest examples money can buy, and the current Bachmann range are much better. You can also invest in the more modern 100 ton wagons, and here's a good example from Hornby of a Golf train. But my interest really will be lying in the Bachmann range, and the Bachmann ones you can get various companies. You get the BP Shell, Esso, and the Mobile range. So these are the three that I've got. Of course, in a block train, you only really want one company. So I've bought several of the Mobile ones. I said about learning from your mistakes. Well, clearly I didn't. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the other 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 wagons that aren't of this. Sorry, 12 wagons of this ilk. But there we go. So, how do we put these together to make them into a decent train? Well, clearly straight out of the box, they look very, very shiny and new, and it's not ideal. So what I decided to do was I bought one from Lord and Butler on the outskirts of Cardiff that's been weathered by a gentleman called Adrian. Adrian also goes by the name of Dirty Boy, and I'm sure that's not a personal thing, but Dirty Boy is what they call him, and he clearly is a weathering guru. So what I decided to do, as I was going to have a rake of these, I thought I'd buy one weathered by Adrian and see if I could replicate it. So that's what I intend to do today. Of course, what I'm not going to do is make all my wagons exactly the same as this one. What I want to do is have some more heavily weathered and some lightly weathered, so we get a variation right through. If you are a modern day modeler, then you might find that a lot of these wagons are just completely grey, and that the company logos have been removed, which would make things much easier. The other thing that limits you with these is if you look at the end of these, you'll find there's a number, and of course every tanker has a running number, and sadly mine are either 57305 or 57303, and all the other four wagons, like I say, have duplicate numbers. If you're really into tanker trains and detail, then clearly you need to approach one of the transfer companies such as Fox and get yourself a sheet of numbers. If you're modelling these kind of black these black wagons, then you want white numbers, and clearly if you're doing these, you'll need black numbers. And just to make things more expensive, there's a number on both sides and on both ends, so you need 4 sets of numbers per tanker. The price just keeps going up, doesn't it? Talking a little more about tanker trains and the blocks that they ran in, the reason, well, in the early steam days, obviously there was a risk of fire going into the tankers, so you had a barrier vehicle or two in the train behind the steam loco, and then the idea was, obviously, if there was an accident or there was a chance of sparks coming from the steam loco actually igniting one of the vents on the tanker train. So by putting in a couple of barrier vehicles then, or barrier wagons, that shouldn't happen, apparently. If you look at a rake of empties, sometimes the barrier wagons aren't there, and that should tell you if they're full or not. But it doesn't seem logical to me, because obviously these wagons would still be full of petrol fumes, but that was the way it was. And there are still modern photographs, well, not modern, let's say at least photographs around in the 70s of barrier vehicles still in use with post-tops class 47s that are still using a barrier vehicle. So when you build your rake, you need to insert a barrier vehicle if that goes with it. Similarly, you may want a brake van. Some of these were not compatible with braking systems, so you would need a brake van at the end. Whereas if modern days 100-ton tanker trains that seem to go on for miles, a brake van's not going to do a lot of good in the first place. But these have all got decent braking systems, and so you don't need a brake van. So you just need to do some research on the internet and find out exactly what's good for you. So where do we go from here? Well, to weather these vehicles up, I think the easiest way to do it is naturally with an airbrush. And our old favourite frame dirt, you would just naturally run an airbrush across this wagon, and then dull the whole thing down and make it look a bit grimy. We could try to streak some weathering in a vertical plane rather than just trying to blow it over. And also we need this oil staining that comes out from the centre, which Adrian's made such a good job. And this one here isn't any more or less glossy than the rest of the wagon, and I imagine that's because he's probably blown a coat of semi-gloss varnish over the wagon. It is what it is. It looks quite good. So what we're trying to do is replicate something along these lines. You need to do your homework with photographs to make sure you're replicating the real thing, because if everyone produces something that looks like this, it will be a pretty boring rake. When you look back at the 100-ton pictures, there appears to be 3 refuel ports on the top. However, when you look into it, it just seems to be staining from the oil and petrol seems to come out of these 2 end ones, and not so much the centre one. On some vehicles you'll find, or some wagons you'll find, actually this area is cleaner than the rest. So what they've probably done is actually clean the wagon down to stop excessive build-up, and you end up with this particular area being cleaner than the rest of the wagon. But there we are. All of my vehicles are kind of pre-tops. They're not plated up with the latest hazard markings, and they don't have, they don't have the post-tops markings, and they don't have the hazard plates markings, which are normally located around this area here. So if you are going to model tankers and you're in a post-tops era, try to buy the right vehicles for your era, and then just save wasting countless pounds as I've done with mine. What could possibly go wrong? So I think what we'll do now is we'll switch to an airbrush and see how we get on. So the setup here is now, I've got one of those old Hornby wagons ready to go. I've degreased it, cleaned it up, and in the paintbrush here, in my airbrush, I've got some frame dirt all mixed up. And whilst I think about this, perhaps the next video I'll do is about airbrushes and perhaps the way that I try to get the best from them. It's not necessarily the best way of doing it, but it's the way I kind of do it. So what do I do next? Well, I put a piece of paper in the sort of target area, and I make sure that the airbrush is working properly. It's a double action airbrush, so when I press down, you just get air, and then when I pull the knob back, you should get paint. And the main thing that I'm after is that the paint isn't splattery, and it is a fine mist, which it is. And I've got the compressor, which you can hear there, running at 10 psi. So now I'm afraid it's time for me to put on my my mask, my face mask. So the rest of it will be me just trying to get the voice across. Right, so ready to go. I shall turn on the extractor for the booth, and here we go. Just make sure the airbrush is clear. And then all I'm trying to do is put a little paint towards the lower areas and across the So there's just a few light sprays, and if I turn it around, you can hopefully see the difference. And this is much duller. The trick about airbrushing is not to put too much on. If necessary, just come back a day later and have another go. Obviously this isn't one of the Bachmann models, because obviously that's a better quality model, and I don't want to ruin a good model whilst I just get my eye in. So what I'm trying to achieve is just a good old all-round coating of muck on this model, to show that it's done a few miles and life hasn't been too kind to it. And we're kind of getting there. So if I just turn the spray booth off now, and there's the earlier one, and there's the one we've done, so you can see the difference, and hopefully you can see that it's weathered down nicely. So it's got a few miles under its belt. Of course, what you normally do now is, with that frame dirt, is you'll whistle along all your wagons in one hit, to save mixing up more paint, but remembering to put a different amount of paint on each wagon, so that one might be have a light coating and one might be particularly heavy. So for this one I wanted a little more paint on it, so it would be, the base weathering would be heavier than the original one that was carried out from by Dirty Boy. And if we put that one alongside, hopefully you can see that the one I've done is considerably muckier. And so returning to the Hornby one which we had to go at earlier, we'll now darken this one right down now the paint's under a chance to dry. I think that's a pretty fair depiction of a wagon that's seen some considerable miles. Again, if I come back out and then we put alongside it another wagon, I think we can appreciate now that the weathering clearly brings the vehicle to life. Okay, so now it's a case of letting that paint harden and dry, and whilst I mix up some paint to try to do the oil streaks. Well, now I've mixed up a can of Humbrol 85, which is black satin coal, and I think I'll give that a go. Obviously I'm not going to try it out on one of my best models straight away, so I'm going to try it out on this 100-ton Golf wagon and see how we get on. I forgot to mention I've also turned the air pressure down on the airbrush from 10 down to 5 psi. But I think we'll start with the one of the old Hornby wagons first. And I think what's key to this is keeping the air pressure on the airbrush compressor as low as you possibly can. And hopefully you can see there the effect, but the effects lessen as the paint dries, which is a little bit more forgiving then if you make a little bit of a hash of it. So here's the one I weathered earlier. See how we get on with that one. So there's my attempt alongside the one from Dirty Boy in Cardiff, and hopefully you may agree that I haven't made such a bad job of it. I think it's fair to say that my initial weathering is somewhat heavier, but at least then you get wagons that look kind of different. I mean, the last thing you want is them all looking the same. Okay, so we're back on the table, and here is that 100-ton mineral wagon that I put a couple of coats on, and hopefully you can see it's looking a little bit better. And I mean, these are cheap and cheerful models, but they're ideal for us to practice on. So that's that one, and that looks okay. I think it's best to avoid spraying the black on the bogies, but then again I can just blow another coat of frame dirt or whatever over the bogies should they become too dark with the effects of the oil. So moving on to the others, that was the Gulf wagon from Hornby beforehand, and then this is the not the finished item, but the one we've progressed to. I like it, I must confess. I'm rather pleased with that. It's really good. And then if you were to run up a train of these, though they're an old tired model with an old from an old mould, I think you get quite a respectable bunch of wagons out of that. So perhaps that was a success. And then finally, there's the wagon we kind of started with. Here's the one from Dirty Boy, as in Lord and Butler, that I bought, that Adrian had done, and here's the one that I kind of replicated, as it were. Adrian's is slightly better in as much as my weathering is a little more spluttery than his was, so perhaps my paint could have been slightly thinner or sprayed at a lower pressure. But I've done this one. There's a bit of me in this, so that really pleases me up. I'm quite pleased with it. It's got the same kind of gloss, and the paint did look just the job, really. I think, which was it was Hornby 85, which is a satin gloss black coal, I believe. One thing to say about these wagons before we go any further, though, is put them away for a good few days for the paint to harden, and then you must spray them with a varnish to make sure that this weathering doesn't just scrape off. Well, there we go, with a little bit of weathering on tankers, and then hopefully you'll agree that some of the results that we've got are actually quite interesting and would not look out of place on a decent model railway. And of course, I didn't pay someone else to do it. It's my work, which gives you a little bit more pride. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. I think for next Friday I'll do an airbrush video. I've got a couple of airbrushes, and so I'll go into some of the finer details of some of the points that you wouldn't necessarily pick up that I've kind of found and learned through mistakes. Most of it is to do with air pressure and consistency of paint, but there we go. So hopefully you'll have enjoyed this video. There should be another video just here, and if you haven't subscribed, then please do. And if you can't subscribe, it's because you don't have a Gmail account, and that's how it all kind of works. So if you've enjoyed it, please subscribe, and I'll see you at the next video, hopefully next Friday lunchtime. Thanks, take care, bye-bye.